we want to welcome you to the How and Why of Local Government Support for Food Systems webinar hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. My name is Ann Palmer, and I'm a program director at the center. Karen Banks is joining me in the room, who's also with CLF. I'm going to introduce our presenters and then talk briefly about what they're going to cover today. We'll have 5 speakers this afternoon. We'll start out with Jelani Newton. Jelani is the Director of Survey Research at the International City-County Management Association. His team collects information on the priorities and activities of local governments in the U.S. and around the world in order to develop and disseminate resources that improve local government management. Jelani has served as Manager of Strategic Planning and Performance for Miami, Florida, and he has worked as a consultant on local government management and budget strategy. Laura Gadaris is a specialist with the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems, where she has worked since 2008. At CRFS, she coordinates outreach, engaging national organizations in improving food systems and community environments, linking ground-level efforts and national stakeholders to inform policy and systems change. She's a certified planner and vice chair of her local planning commission. Laura has more than a decade of experience in research, outreach, and program administration around issues of economic development, community development, and transportation planning, much of it within the context of food systems. Our third speaker will be Ed Barrett. Ed's the city administrator for the city of Lewiston, Maine. Ed began his municipal career in the Budget and Research Department in Tucson, Arizona. He served as the Director of Administrative Services and the Assistant City Manager for the city of Wichita Falls, Texas. Ed was appointed City Manager in Bangor, Maine in 1988, where his accomplishments included downtown revitalization, waterfront redevelopment, several revisions to the city's comprehensive plan, and expansions to the city's parks and forest system. In January 2010, he was appointed Lewiston's City Administrator, a position he holds today. Holly Freishtat is Baltimore City's first food policy director. She created the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative, an intergovernmental collaboration that seeks to address food system policy. Holly has spent over a decade working on food issues in a variety of contexts, as a nutritionist, an educator, and a farmer. In 2016, she was awarded the 2016 Medallion for Meritorious Service by the Mayor of Baltimore and was honored as one of Maryland Daily Record's top 100 women in Maryland. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative was recognized internationally with the highest award for their implementation of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact on World Food Day in 2016. Kathleen Holian has served as the County Commissioner for Santa Fe, New Mexico since January 2009. During her tenure in office, the county adopted a new sustainable growth management plan to reduce sprawl development, ensure sufficient future water resources, and protect the natural environment. They also rewrote the land use code, implementing the goals of the plan while establishing zoning for the first time in Santa Fe County. In her role as commissioner, she has personally championed initiatives to further sustainability in the county, promoting renewable energy development, encouraging more local agriculture to promote food security, increasing recycling, and advancing land restoration activities to promote land health and reduce wildfire danger. In addition to her professional accomplishments, Kathleen and her husband are implementing a restoration plan for the 800 acres they own on the Glorieta Mesa in the Santa Fe area. So for today's webinar, I'm going to just provide an overview of CLF and the Food Policy Networks project, and then I'll turn it over to Jelani and Laura to discuss their survey of local governments and food systems. After their presentation, we'll hear from the local government representatives, Ed, Holly, and Kathleen. At the end of their talk, we'll open up for questions from you. You are welcome to write questions in the question box on your control panel at any time during the webinar. We will send out the materials that the speakers reference along with the slides and recording after the webinar. All attendees are muted and will remain in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. So the Center for Livable Future is an interdisciplinary center located at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our work focuses on the intersection of diet, environment, food production, and public health. We have an education program that includes a food systems certificate, food systems coursework, curriculum development, and we also support a number of doctoral students every year. We conduct research and support other faculty members' research and collaborate with other research institutions. And in addition, we have 4 program areas. The Food Communities and Public Health program is where the Food Policy Networks project resides. The goal of the FPN project is to build the capacity of food system stakeholders to reform local, state, regional, and tribal food systems through effective public policy. We do it through training, sharing best practices, networking with other food policy groups and leaders, and developing and providing food policy resource materials. If you aren't familiar with the project, I encourage you to check out our website and to sign up for our listserv to hear about future webinars hosted by our project. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Jelani, sorry. Jelani, you're up next.
Great, thanks, Ann. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar and share some of the information on what we've been doing at ICMA related to food systems. We're really excited about our partnership with Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems, and Laura, my colleague, will provide some of the details on what we found in our most recent survey. But before that, I was hoping to just tell you a little bit about ICMA and why we think this is a very important area of study for us. So if we can move to the next slide. Okay. So ICMA is a professional association for local government managers around the world. Our mission is to promote excellence in local governance by developing and fostering professional local management. Founded in 1914, we have more than 11,000 members, communities of all sizes, all around the globe. And our core activities cover 4 primary areas. We advocate for professional management of local government. We provide professional development services. The largest activity in our professional development portfolio is our annual conference that happens in the fall every year and convenes typically 3,000 to 4,000 local government managers or stakeholders from around the country, sometimes around the world. In addition, we host webinars and provide trainings and certificate programs on a variety of areas that we think are important for our members and other local managers. In the area of technical assistance, we provide direct assistance to communities on topics like sustainability, and especially internationally in the developing world, focused on water, sanitation, food security, and other important issues. Our research function is the team that actually I'm privileged to participate on, and we support our members and other practitioners by collecting information on local government priorities and practices, developing and disseminating that information, and not only improving the practice of local government management, but also helping to expand the knowledge base. We have an audience of our members. We also have an audience of academics, students. We have student chapters at ICMA as well, and we have, of course, a large audience of non-member practitioners as well. A large component of our research and policy team is our survey research practice, and we've been collecting survey information for many decades here at ICMA, and we have a very robust body of data. And we use that data to develop resources and information to support the practice. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the most recent survey that we launched in partnership with Michigan State University, our 2015 food system survey. And before getting into some of the details on the survey, I wanted to just articulate why we at ICMA find this topic to be so important. Local food systems intersects with a number of priority areas that, as an organization, we have and that we have developed on behalf of our members. Public health is a clear area of intersection, as we believe local food policies have the ability to affect health outcomes in communities by improving access to healthy food, awareness, nutrition information, and through other programs. economic development has always been a high priority for ICMA's members and for the organization. And again, there are just strong intersections between local food systems and economic development outcomes, whether through creating jobs or helping to develop the local workforce or through other programs. Sustainability and resilience is a priority that we have been focusing on more recently. We also have recently closed our 2015 sustainability survey, but of course the impact of food security, of land use, of redevelopment of brownfields and other food-related topics play a big part in local governments focus on sustainability and resilience. And then, of course, there's an emphasis on policy and governance and exactly what role local government should be playing and how they can help to influence the outcomes that are desired in their communities. ICMA's research around food systems began even before the 2015 survey. We actually conducted a national survey in 2012 that looked at local government activities related to food systems. In 2015, between 2012 and 2015, we did follow-up research, and in 2015, we released a case study series focused on the efforts of the 4 communities in particular: Catawba County, Decatur, Georgia, Topsham, Maine, and Washtenaw County, Ann Arbor, Michigan. All of this work was funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, so I wanted to recognize them and express our appreciation for providing us with the resource that allowed us to do this work. So all of this led up to our 2015 survey, which really served as a follow-up survey and also explored some new topics. If we could go to the next slide. Great, thank you. The 2015 survey was launched in 2015 and actually closed late that year. We sent a paper questionnaire to 14,000 U.S. local governments with an option for an online submission. The response rate of 15.7% ended up yielding more than 2,000 valid responses. With all that information, we were able to learn a lot about where local governments are prioritizing food systems plans and policy, what the motivators are, how those programs are aligned organizationally, and also about the awareness or use of federal resources in local governments. The respondents were primarily chief administrative officers, so city managers, county managers, township managers, village administrators, the senior most appointed official in the local government. And we found that we got responses from communities of all sizes, from less than 2,500 in population to over 1 million in population. About 75% of the responses came from communities between 2,500 and 25,000 in population. So again, Laura is going to talk a little bit more about what we found in this research effort. We are very excited about the findings and about what it means for our work to continue to advance and promote local food systems in communities around the country. What we've already done, we've created a summary report to highlight the findings. We've hosted a roundtable discussion at ICMA's annual conference, and Laura actually authored for us an article that will appear in a special edition of ICMA's magazine, PM Magazine. Looking to the future, we're hoping to be able to continue to share our work and the findings through forums like this, and also to add value for interested stakeholders through providing education, professional development activities, and leverage the data that we've collected for follow-up research to better understand some of the key themes and findings that evolve from the research. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Laura to talk a bit more about the survey findings.
Great, thanks, Jelani, and thanks to Karen and Ann at CLF for hosting this webinar and including all of us on the panel today. it's really exciting that there's been so much interest in this topic from both inside and outside local governments. When you registered for the webinar, we had asked some questions about the nature of your affiliation, and including with local governments. And so we had access to that information, but we wanted to start quickly here with just a quick poll, if Karen has that ready to go, so that you all could see the breakdown of who actually is here on the webinar today. So if people could select which of the three choices best reflects their local government affiliation, whether you're an elected or appointed official, a member of a local government staff, or more of a concerned citizen. We'll just leave that up for just a minute. Just so we kind of know who we're talking to. I'm waiting for the results from Karen.
We are almost there. There's a few more trickling in, Laura.
Okay. Okay.
We'll give it 2 more seconds. All right, and I'm going to close it. And there you go.
Okay, so yeah, we had, I think in terms of registrations, we had about half and half staff versus citizens. So today it looks like more citizens than staff. And we know you're probably all at kind of various levels in your work in this area. So hopefully we'll be able to provide information that speaks to all of you on some level. So as Jelani mentioned, I'm going to be talking more in depth about our survey results. And as we move into these, some of the slides, I'll warn you, are a little bit dense. And I'm going to try and go quick enough to make sure we save room to hear from the local leaders and have time for your questions. So just as Jelani and Ann have said, we will be providing follow-up information, links to summaries of some of this information, and as well as copies of today's slides. So don't worry too much if you miss something. So I'll just start out by, on the next slide here, kind of following Jelani's description. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Following Jelani's description of the scope and distribution of our 2015 survey, I wanted to share a visual description or depiction of what these 2,300 plus communities looked like. So this map just indicates communities that returned the survey. The dots in blue represent municipalities of all those different sizes, from the very, very small to the very, very large. And the orange dots are the county respondents. And so this is everyone who responded to the survey. It doesn't give any indication of kind of the level of activity in any community. So if we go to the next slide, I certainly should acknowledge that this group is not 100% on board with the local food movement, and just included a few samples of some of the responses we got to some of our open-ended questions, kind of pushing back that food is a topic that should be relevant to local governments. These are just a few of the kind of negative responses that we got. There were some that minced even less words, telling us that the survey was stupid, but others were much more nuanced in their comments about why they maybe didn't have so much to say on the topic. I want to note too that some reflected a particularly narrow perception of food. So something like the one, oh, it's not up here, but you know, we're a wealthy suburb, so we don't have food deserts, or we have no agricultural land, so this doesn't apply to us. Or the one here that, you know, it's not government's job to feed the poor, which certainly wasn't the only aspect of food covered by the survey, but that's sort of what they zeroed into. But on this next slide, as a counterpoint, I included just one example of a more supportive or positive comment. I thought that this quote about kind of where this local government was did a nice job of kind of concisely acknowledging notions of, you know, figuring out their role, their motivation, the role of partners, and some challenges that they face, even though they kind of have embraced food systems, agriculture, food security as something that's important to them. So I'm gonna have a few more of those quick polls throughout my slides here. So we saw at the start we have about 60% just under staff, and maybe 30-some%, or sorry, 50 to 60% concerned citizens, and a lot of the rest of you are staff on the webinar today. So from whatever perspective you sit at, we wanted to do a quick poll now to see how you would characterize the level of support your local government is providing to food activities at this point. So very supportive, somewhat supportive, sort of neutral, or are they maybe actively opposing the work that you're interested in? So I'll let Karen kind of talk us through how much time she wants to allow for this.
Thanks, Laura. We're about at 70% right now, so we'll give it a few more seconds for a couple more people to answer. Okay.
All right, so let's see, we're about just under 2/3 kind of somewhat supportive. That's probably not too surprising. 26% very supportive, 15% neutral, and 2% in opposition. Of course, these terms are subjective, and I think we're certainly still trying to figure out what like a little supportive looks like, what a lot supportive looks like, and how do we make those determinations using the data that we have from our survey results. But so this breakdown is interesting to have for context. So, okay, this is the most dense slide that you're going to see. So I should have given you a little bit more warning, but I would encourage you, you don't need to try to digest every last little thing here. This chart summarizes a huge chunk of the survey where we presented a matrix of 24 different specific local food activities and asked whether they existed in the community. And then we also asked whether, if they existed, did the local government support them at all via policies, via programs, or partnerships. So this chart is showing in the green bars the percent of communities where the activity was reported. And then below each green bar in purple is showing the percentage of communities where local governments are providing some form of support to that activity. So it's more about kind of seeing how the green and purple compare. So some activities are more policy oriented and kind of almost require government to be involved. So something like buying local and government facilities, that's one of the things you'll find in the middle of that list. But others, like some of the emergency food activities, tend to rely a little less on government. You'll see some of those, one of those at the top, there's another one further down. I would also just point out here that there aren't, I guess I would say there aren't a ton of activities that are generating like really big, impressive numbers. And I'll give you a closer look at what activities were on the very top and very bottom of this list in just a minute. But despite that, we are still finding examples of all of these things on this list in communities across the country in places of all different sizes. So there's not necessarily a ton of clear learnings about best practices. So if we move to the next slide, this is just showing you, without the percentages, just the list of activities that were at the very top and very bottom of that last chart. And I just wanted to make the point here that while the ones on the right, the bottom 6, really looked like tiny fractions on that previous chart, for each of these activities, we're still talking about finding 50, sometimes up to 100 communities that might be doing these things. And again, those not necessarily, they tend to be all over the map, literally, and in terms of size and other demographic characteristics. So if you're looking for interesting models, that's not nothing to have, that sort of handful, so to speak, to potentially follow up and examine. So if we can go to the next slide and put the original map up for just a minute, and then we'll go ahead and advance one more to this purple map. What you're seeing as you go from one to the next is, so you have the blue and orange one was everybody who responded, doesn't say anything about what they're doing. The purple map shows communities that were providing some form of support to at least one activity that was on that big long list. And for the purposes of this map, I just did municipalities and counties all as one color. So this is 73% of the total communities represented on a previous map. And I think that's an interesting finding, that nearly 3/4 of local governments responding are supporting at least one of these local food activities. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what is motivating local governments to engage in this arena, which was a new type of question that we directly posed with the 2015 survey. So we found that more than half of communities were drawing connections between food and another broad community priority. And as this slide indicates, on average, they were actually connecting with an average of almost 3. So before we look at their top responses, I just wanted to ask through another one of these little polls, wanted to see from you all, choosing from a few options, how you would describe the motivations of your local government to engage in food activities in your community. So you can pick one or more. We've got 5 choices up here. We're unfortunately only limited to 5 choices. We had a few extra on the survey, but so we've got economic or workforce development, environmental stewardship, food access and security, public health, and social equity.
We're at about 60%. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay.
Okay. So top 2 being public health and food access and security, followed by economic. And still getting very respectable amounts of responses. Body of respondents. So, so pretty similar. You notice, so their top association was also with public health. I didn't put the phrase community development in the choices we provided with this poll because I think some of those themes, more explicit themes about food access, equity, I suspected, maybe resonate a little bit more with some of us. But I think clearly, you could roll up some of those themes into community development or health. And I think so. Another thing that's interesting about these findings is I think that they help illustrate and confirm the cross-cutting nature of food systems work, and they might be somewhat informative as we think about how best to frame an issue based on the priorities of our own communities. So we can go to the next slide, which is somewhat related, but thinking about who actually within local government are seen as being responsible for food systems activities. So I think this might be our last little poll. So we'll do one last one. If you're in a local government, or if you're in a local government, where do you sit? And if you're working outside a local government, who do you go to? What departments do you tend to go to for food systems work? So again, we're limited to 5 choices. So we are offering administration, economic development, health, parks and rec, or planning. And again, oh, you can just pick one on this one, that's right.
And again, we're at about 60%, and we'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll.
Thanks, Karen. So we have health as our top response, followed by planning, and then administration, 16%, interesting, followed by economic development and parks and rec. Okay, and then we'll compare those to our results. again, just over half of these communities, we can go to the next slide, identified at least one department, and with our results, planning was overall the most common. So I also broke out the responses between municipalities and counties on the chart on your right, because there was a little bit of interesting variation, county health departments being the most extreme example of that. But yeah, fairly similar to what we had. Again, we gave them more choices than you all had. On the next slide, since planning was the most common department mentioned, I just wanted to share a few quick notes about some planning-related findings. So we found about 20% of respondents, which amounted to about 400 communities, who indicated that they had some type of official plan or strategy on the books that dealt with food. And about half of those were described as master plans or comprehensive plans. And I think we had about just over 50 food-specific plans were noted, which is pretty interesting. And other plans could be, economic development or sustainability plans. And this, the overall number is fairly consistent with what we found in 2012. On the other hand, only 8% of all communities have done any sort of mapping of the food environment, either by themselves or with external consultants. There's probably an opportunity to grow that number. We can move to the next slide. So thinking back to some of the earlier comments that I shared, this is the second to last dense chart. I think probably most of us know that this work is best done, or perhaps only done, through partnerships. We can't and we don't expect government to do it all. So we wanted to get a sense of how different types of both internal and external stakeholder groups were influencing the work. So this shows the results there. We asked about all these different groups, and we said, are they a primary driver? Do they have some influence, or are they exercising no influence over your work? So a couple of impressions I take from this summary are that the nonprofit and citizen-based stakeholders do seem to drive the work the most, which may be completely appropriate and not that surprising. But also, kind of on the bottom quarter or third of this chart, there might be opportunities for local governments and coalitions that are seeking resources to support their food work to tap some of these groups listed towards the bottom, because there's certainly interest among all of those constituencies. And I do have one more slide that will provide more detail on the federal programs. But one second to last slide we can move to before I get there. Just wanted to share few quick last findings that quantify other forms of support local governments are providing. So just about, we can go to that next one if you would please. Just about 900 local governments indicated that they're at least informally supportive of food work in their communities. And we asked this question because in our previous case study research and interactions with smaller communities, we found that there might sometimes be a lot going on, but it was really just that simple. It was more about kind of making connections for people and having an open door mentality. But on the more formal side of things, about 300 of those 900 indicated that they or their staff were participating in some type of food policy council, as many of you on the line do. And about 19% were collaborating with their neighboring communities. That's pretty consistent with the 2012 survey. So last chart on the next slide is one that generated a lot of interest last time around at the federal level. And this shows the results of questions that were aimed to capture how much local governments were aware of various federal programs that could be used to support food system work in some way. And we also asked to what extent they had actually used them, and if they weren't using them, would they be interested? So once again, you see that local governments tended to be more familiar with the non-USDA programs, although somewhat unfair to put these on the same chart since they vary so widely in terms of eligibility and how frequently they're offered. But once again, community development block grants got the most reported use and awareness. I will add, though, that in general, we did see a slight uptick in interest related to USDA programs since the last survey. So maybe maybe attributable to the Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative. So that's all I'm going to throw at you today. There's a lot here. On this next slide, I have my contact information. I encourage you to refer to the supplementary materials that we'll provide and to follow up with me directly if we can mine this data set for any specific queries you might have about particular activities or communities. But at this point, I'm really looking forward to hearing from our local leaders about what this looks like in their communities. I think Ed is going to be our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Ed Barrett. I'm the City Administrator in the City of Lewiston, Maine. We are a council manager form of government, so I'm basically the Chief Executive Officer. And if you pop up the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the City of Lewiston. Lewiston is the second largest city in the state. We have a population of about 36,500. We are located about 40 miles north of Portland, which is the largest city in the state. We have an interesting development pattern. The city encompasses 34 square miles. We have an extremely dense urban core clustered right in our downtown area with a fairly lightly settled suburban and rural fringe. Much of that was because of the development patterns of the city. We started as a mill community with most of our jobs and employment along the river, which is downtown. Very dense residential area, a lot of tenement houses on very small lots. At one point, we probably had 5,000 to 6,000 people who walked to work downtown. More recently, since about 2000, we've also seen a change in our population with significant immigration from East and Central Africa, starting with Somalia and spreading out from there. This is into a state that's one of the whitest in the union, and certainly at the time this started, Lewiston was very representative of the state's population. So that introduced some additional challenges. About 53% of the folks who live in Lewiston are renters. One of our realities is, given that dense core of multifamily housing, our rents are relatively low, and that has been attractive both to our immigrant population coming in and also to individuals who are in need of economic or some kind of social or social support. As a result, our median household incomes are low, a little bit under $37,000 a year, and we have about 23.6% of our population living in poverty. So why are we interested in food? Next slide. Primarily because we think healthy food access contributes to community and economic development and does so in a variety of ways, and they're listed on the slide. Improve student performance in our schools, improving family and workforce health, building a sense of community, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Economic impact through the buy local movement, the CSA movement, local farming movement, an increase in low-income spending power and focusing some of that spending power on access to good food as opposed to fast food or junk food that's easily obtainable. Skill training, and this applies particularly to our immigrant community, strengthening collaborations with other groups that are interested in this issue, putting some of our own city land back into productive use and some of the surrounding farmland back into farmland use, and utilizing the skills of our new Americans. Next slide. Our focus areas have been basically started with food insecurity because that's a huge problem here. We have one downtown elementary school that's 100% low and reduced lunch program folks. So we wanted to start by identifying and addressing that problem. We also then grew into supporting for regional agricultural development and putting some specific programs in place for our immigrant population. Next, in the area of food insecurity, the Good Food Council of Lewiston, Auburn, which is really pulling together a bunch of our partners, completed a community food assessment in 2013, working with Bates College, University of Southern Maine, and some other folks, and cited 6 issues that needed to be addressed. Lack of transportation access, limited food choices in our downtown, cultural obstacles that largely to some extent involve not only our immigrant community, but some of our long-term folks who have been in poverty for generations, limited government programs to meet those needs, a lack of connection and collaboration between all the groups working in the area, and a lack of education about food and healthy eating. Next, please. As a result, we really focused in on partnerships. The food assessment highlighted the need for coordinating the efforts of all of these various groups. And the Good Food Council that did the food assessment has really started to serve as kind of that coordinating body. The city's role in all of this has been largely supportive, participating in these efforts through staff involvement, where possible, providing some level of in-kind support. Also, some CDBG funding was provided to some organizations working in this area. And we have donated or set aside some vacant city properties for things like community gardens. In the area of food insecurity, the next slide, we work very closely with one local group, St. Mary's Nutrition Center. They do a lot of traditional things. They have a food pantry, for example, but they've also expanded out really into other areas. So, for example, in their community garden program, they have about 10 gardens in the community. 4 of those are on city property. But it's beyond the simple parks and recreation. Here's the property, sign up and plant. They provide seeds, they provide tools, they provide training, both in farming or growing vegetables, and also in nutritional education. So they're doing a more wraparound program with these individuals. Tied in with that, they have programs for children and operate a number of food access initiatives. Farmers Market is one. It's located on city property and operates year-round. They also have, interestingly, a bulk buying club, which I think addresses the problem many low-income people have of trying to have access to quantities of good food at a reasonable price. And since many of our low-income folks don't have transportation, they've cooperated with another agency to set up a good food bus that basically is a mobile market that they take around to various locations for people to operate or to buy things from. Next, please. We got interested in supporting regional agriculture largely through working with our local council of governments. Agriculture has been a growing element of the surrounding rural economy, and we see it as really a replacement for some of the natural resource industries that the area has lost. So working with the COG and supporting their efforts, there have been grants to establish bulk purchasing and grain storage facilities at various farms, grants to support energy systems that lower costs, establishing a seed capital program for emerging industries that we're seeing in agriculture. We've seen some interest in hops farming and processing and organic farming, and support for infrastructure development necessary to support a lot of our local farmers. In Maine, most of our farms are small, and so by trying to pull them together into cooperatives, trying to provide them with infrastructure that they need to expand their production, we can make a good economic impact. Next, please. Give you an idea of some of what's happened. Over the last 5 years, Black and American and African American farms have increased in Maine from 17 to 68, and many of those are related to our immigrant population. We're starting farms at 4 times the national average, seeing a great growth in younger farmers, 34 and under, and as a result are seeing more land farmed, production value increase, and the number of farms increase. We see this, it seems like for a period of time, every rural community wanted its own industrial park, and those really weren't necessarily very successful. We see returning to agricultural roots as a way to economic improvements in the rural area, and certainly that supports and benefits us. A really interesting program is our new Mainer program that was started by Cultivating Community, which is a New American Sustainable Agricultural Project. They basically leased a farm right over the town line in our neighboring community, enroll and train immigrants, have 30 farmers working on this now, and are selling to farm stands, cooperatives. They operate a CSA. Basically, last year they probably sold about $250,000 worth of produce. This fits in with our population, that many of our immigrants have come from a tradition of sustainable agriculture in their home countries, just they don't yet know how to deal with winter. So we've been working with them so that they can learn what grows here in the growing season and things like that. That spun off a New Roots cooperatively owned farm, immigrant-owned farm here in Lewiston that just started up this year. So we see that as a way to really start moving at least a portion of our immigrant community into positive economic situation, tying back into their historical roots. Finally, some connections you might want to make. These are some links to the various groups, some of which I've talked about today, to get a little bit better idea of how some of these programs work. And with that, I guess it's my turn to turn it back to whoever's next.
Hi, I'm Holly Freishtat, Food Policy Director for Baltimore City. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative. We have two key goals. Can you please turn the slides? One is to establish Baltimore as a leader in sustainable local food systems, and this is coming from our sustainability plan of 2009. And the other goal on the next slide is to improve health outcomes by increasing access to healthy, affordable food in Baltimore City's food desert. So what's unique to Baltimore as we go into the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative intergovernmental collaboration is that we're four key agencies working together: Office of Sustainability, Department of Planning, Health Department, and the Baltimore Development Corporation. In addition, we have our Food Policy Advisory Committee. It's 60 members strong and growing. And together, we're looking at how do we address food access and local food systems from an intergovernmental perspective. So if you look on the next slide, there is a complicated looking wheel. And in the last several years, we've been working with 12 different agencies. I think I counted last around 35 programs plus related to food. And so one of the things that we have done quite a bit of work on is understanding how food intersects so many different agencies. And how all the agencies were already working on food, but did not know who else is working on the issues as well. So we divided this wheel up by actually the mayor's org chart. So we have economic and neighborhood development, government relations and labor, public safety, and then health human services. And this is just a very quick glimpse. Just so you know, most of these slides are hyperlinked to more information, so I'm just going to go over it quickly. On the next slide, we're going to talk about how influencing policy through data and reports. And we could never do this without the collaboration with Johns Hopkins School of Public Health Center for Livable Future. They're really the intellectual capital. Sorry, my slides are so blank. They're really the intellectual capital behind the reports. Does everyone else see the slides besides me? Just out of curiosity.
Yes.
Okay. So my slides are no longer working, so I'm going off my handout. So I'm just going to tell you the next slides, okay? I cannot see what you all see. So right now I'm looking at the Food Environment Map report and the Food Desert Map. So what we have done in Baltimore City is we have a very specific food desert definition and a city-issued map in collaboration with Hopkins. And this has been one of the driving factors for our policies and strategies. So who's impacted? 25% of Baltimore City residents. When we're looking at equity, Black residents are four more times likely to live in a food desert than white residents. So we really need to look at structural racism in our food system, and our strategies and policies really need to be looking at different neighborhoods and different strategies in different locations. So that brings me to the next slide of our council district maps. So last June, we released 14 council district food environment maps in addition to our city map. And that was really a new endeavor for us, and probably one of the most important things we've done in the food environment mapping from a policy perspective. So I briefed every council member, 14 council members, on their own food environment maps. And what we found is because we went into more detail in the council district maps, we went into the food retail environment, we went to local foods and food assistance. So every council member can see where their food pantries are, where their summer feeding sites are, their urban farms, farmers markets, in addition to corner stores, convenience stores, and supermarkets. And we're really able to hone in on how the neighborhoods are the same or different. And we were pretty surprised by some of the findings. I assumed that in council districts where there's a high number of residents living in food deserts, it would be equally distributed, but it wasn't always the case. In some cases, it was a really disproportionate amount of seniors being impacted. In another area, it was kids. So that was a very quick overview of who we are and how research has influenced our work. And now I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is around local foods and farm efforts. You can see there, it's a cool picture actually in one of our hoop houses, that our hoop houses, around 7 years ago, we had 3 hoop houses in the city. And by changing the building code by a few words, we were able to go from a couple hoop houses that were actually illegal at the time to 50+ hoop houses. And so that was just one example of a policy change. So on the next slide, it's a slide that says the 4 Ps. And so this is our own interpretation of the 4 Ps. So policy. And I just want to go through a couple policies that we have worked on. But overall, in the last 6.5 years, we've worked on 14 policies from city, state, and federal policies. But I'm just going to highlight a few. So the 3 I'm going to discuss is the food desert incentive area. So what we were able to do with the maps was we looked at the maps and said, and interviewed all the grocery stores in the area or who we wanted to come into the area, and understood the issue related to personal property tax credit. It is personal property, excuse me. That's everything you can shake out of a grocery store. It turns out that our personal property tax is much higher in Baltimore City than anywhere else in the region. And so we were able to use the map to create a food desert incentive area. And in that incentive area, grocery stores who are coming into the area or who are currently in the area but want to renovate their stores could get a personal property tax credit. Another one is our urban ag tax credit. We have an urban ag plan in the city, and we have a land leasing initiative for farmers to grow on city-owned land, and then we have an urban ag tax credit on private property, and that's on real property. And so that was to really make growing food in the city affordable and reduce the property taxes. And the third policy is more of the little p policies. And I have to say that so much of our work around policy is actually partnerships and people. But we have made significant changes in some legislation policy as well. But this little p policy was a realization that every labor union in the city had different wellness incentives. Some had more, some had less. But one of the labor unions had a wellness incentive so that if you wanted to join a gym, you could get a $250 rebate for joining a gym. So it occurred to us, what if we added a CSA so that you could join for half share of a CSA for $300, you get reimbursed $250. And so I hyperlinked onto this presentation a new article that just came out from Ross Foundation on our CSAs and the impact it has on health. Going into the next area of plans and strategies, food is an important part of planning, and we've looked at it in many different perspectives. So Healthy Baltimore 2020 was just released this past summer, and that was the entire plan was based on equity. And within that, there was specific goals related to food access and equity. Our sustainability plan, we're currently revising it as we speak. It will be released this spring. As well, it has an entire equity lens to the sustainability plan. And we will have a chapter on food systems and food access within the plan as well. The third one is food resilience. We have a food resilience strategy. It started off with the civil unrest in Baltimore and understanding the role government needs to play for food distribution and food supply in times of emergency. And what we realized was that communication was the #1 strategy that needed to be addressed. When we mapped out emergency response related to food, there was over 22 different organizations, businesses, agencies, and hundreds of people who are all having direct response related to food in times of emergencies. And so that was one of the factors that helped us really look at food resilience. And we have a food resilience planner in the city now. And we have a food resilience plan that will be released this spring in collaboration with Hopkins as well. Moving into the food desert retail strategy, that strategy was based off of the maps. It was based off of the maps. It was based off of community food assessments, interviews with retailers. And it is a strategy that evolves. It is not a fixed strategy. It's not legislation. As we learn more, we start to continue to adapt and add to it. And our last part of the 4 Ps is really looking at people. Our Food Policy Action Coalition, sorry, I used an older name in the earlier slides, is one key piece. And this coalition has really evolved over the last 6.5 years. At first, it was a matter of breaking down silos. There were so many organizations working on food, and nobody knew what everyone else was doing. So the initial goal was just everyone who was working on food from an organizational perspective to get in a room, break down silos, increase productivity and effectiveness. As times have changed and we have evolved, we really wanted to go beyond the organizations who are doing the work to residents' perspectives and have a more diverse representation of FoodPAC. And so for the last year, we have really opened FoodPAC meetings, or really trying to make sure that the times and the locations and the agendas are conducive so residents can find a useful place in FoodPAC as well. And so that has been happening, and there's a hyperlink on the slides related to our organizational structure that discusses that more. And then we also have our neighborhood food advocates through the Baltimore Market program, which is community-based food access programming run by residents for residents. And moving to the next slide on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. So last year, Baltimore was one of 100 and I think it was 30 cities who signed the pact in Milan. And this pact has 6 key pillars. And what was really significant about the pact, it was the first time that mayors from all over the world were signing a pact that was addressing the entire food system. It was not just anti-hunger, it was not just around waste reduction or climate change, but it was the whole spectrum of the food system. So this past October in Rome, there was an award ceremony for cities who've signed the pact, and Baltimore was honored and fortunate to win the highest prize or highest scoring award related to implementation of the Food Policy Pact. And we won on the concept of our governance structure, of really looking at how do you grow government's perspectives and collaboration with residents in addressing food access and local food systems. And moving to my last slide, which is my nice zucchini slide there, I'm just going to conclude, and I know that we'll be having questions in a few minutes. And just for the moderator, I cannot see any slides at this point, so please repeat the questions out loud. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly, and thank you, Ed. We will be reading the questions out loud for sure. We have one more presenter, and that's Kathleen Holian with the Santa Fe County. She's a County Commissioner. Kathleen, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. And I apologize that I don't have view graphs and that I'm just on the phone, but I will sort of give you a synopsis of what we're doing in Santa Fe County with regard to food security and food policy. First of all, I thought I would just sort of describe Santa Fe County a little bit. It is a very rural county. It's in northern New Mexico. It's about 2,000 square miles, but only about 100 square miles of that are actually in incorporated areas. There's quite a lot of land that's national forest land, but there's also a lot of agricultural land, particularly in the northern part of the county. We have the Pewaukee River Valley, and that is really a great place for food production. The soils are really good, and there's a long history of agriculture in that area, going back 400 years at least. Well, probably even longer than that if you think of the indigenous people who lived here. In the southern part of the county, there are many large ranches. Cattle grazing tends to be more common in that area, and also a lot of alfalfa is grown in the southern part of the county. We also, interestingly enough, have 6 Indian pueblos within the boundaries of the county, and they all have some agricultural activities. And in fact, I just like to point out that the Tisuke Pueblo, in fact, is has created a repository for local heirloom seeds so that we can save the seeds that historically have been used in this area and work particularly well in our dry climate. We also have a great farmers market, which operates, I think, 4 days a week in 2 different locations. Anyway, the Santa Fe farmers market is actually well known throughout the country as being quite diverse and very successful. Now, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the county priorities, that were the Santa Fe County priorities, and these are all official because they've been set by resolutions that the Board of County Commissioners has passed over the last several years. One big priority is to reduce food insecurity in our area. Even though Santa Fe County is a relatively rich county, they estimate that probably 15 to 20% of the people who live here experience food insecurity in one form or another. And sadly, a large percentage of that percentage is kids. A second priority is to encourage people in our community to eat healthy food so that they are healthier. Historically, the diet here was very healthy. You may have heard of the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, and those were commonly grown. Even as recently as probably 50 years ago, most of the families who lived here, even those who lived in the city area, had land and they grew their own food and they had gardens and they had chickens and they probably had a milk cow. So traditionally, people have really had a healthy diet, but unfortunately in recent years, people have lost the ability to garden, especially in the incorporated areas, and of course junk food is a lot more accessible. We recently put in place the Santa Fe County Health Action Plan, and one of the top 5 priorities in that health action plan was to get healthy food to the people in our community and to teach them how to prepare it. Another top priority for us is to make locally grown food accessible to the people in our communities. Right now, a lot of food is grown throughout New Mexico. There's a lot of agricultural and ranching activity, but unfortunately about 97% of that food is exported out of the state, and roughly 97% of the food that people consume in the state comes from out of state. And so we want to change that ratio, really, over time. Another high priority for the county is to preserve agricultural and ranch land. We have an awful lot of agricultural and ranch land just within Santa Fe County itself. And as a matter of fact, recently we passed a new land development code, which we call the Sustainable Land Development Code. And the idea is to reduce or eliminate sprawl development in the county, which has really been a problem in recent years, and to direct growth to areas that are close into the city so that we can make sure that our ag and ranch land continues to be ag and ranch land. So I wanted to also give you an example of a successful plan that we have done in Santa Fe County very recently, and I'm very proud of this plan. We call it the Agricultural and Ranching Implementation Plan. And the reason that the word implementation is important is it's, what we're setting out are things that we're actually going to do in our county. Now, the Board of County Commissioners adopted this plan just in July, and a great deal of work and effort went into developing the plan. There were numerous community meetings where we brought together farmers and ranchers and individuals in our community who are concerned or deal with food security issues. And we asked them, what do you think should be in our plan so that farmers and ranchers can make a living here and that we can get healthy food to the people who actually live in our community. So the goal of the plan is, number one, to provide support to farmers and ranchers so that they can actually continue farming and ranching and they can actually make a living doing that. The second goal is to connect the farmers and ranchers in our area with the markets that exist in our community so that the people in the community can actually get that food. So the elements of the plan are, some of the important elements of this plan are, one, to promote awareness of options that farmers and ranchers have for actually preserving their land as ag land. One way is for farmers or ranchers to put conservation easements on their land, and New Mexico has a very generous tax credit for putting a conservation easement on your land, and farmers and ranchers can either use that tax credit, important to realize it's a tax credit, not a tax deduction, or they can actually, even if they can't use it directly, if they don't really pay a lot of taxes, New Mexico state taxes, they can sell the tax credit. So just as an example, the Santa Fe Conservation Trust actually put a conservation easement on a piece of land. They got a $250,000 tax credit. They couldn't really use it because they're a nonprofit, so they sold it to Apple Computer for $220,000. So that can be a way that farmers and ranchers can actually get money to continue farming and ranching. Another thing, a program that we're putting in place is something called Transfer of Development Rights, a TDR program. They've done this successfully in Boulder. And the idea is that people who have ag or ranching land can, they could, in principle, develop their land if they wanted. They could divide it up into a lot of smaller lots and then sell them off, and people could put homes on those lots and so on. But they can also instead actually sell the development rights that they could use to develop to developers who want to develop more densely in areas in Santa Fe County that is close into the city where we want development to occur. And the county, as we speak, is creating a TDR bank so that we will be able to immediately purchase these development rights, put them in the bank, and then we can sell them later to developers who want to develop a bit more densely. The second thing is to increase, this plan will do, is to increase access to programs and resources that our farmers and ranchers can take advantage of. For example, there's a lot of farmers and ranchers in our area who are aging, and they would really like to have interns, and so we're going to join this Land Link program so that we can connect interns or young people who would like to be interns to farmers and ranchers who would like to have interns to help them with the work on their land. And this will also be a way of linking people without land who actually want to farm with people who own land who, for some reason or other, can no longer farm it or ranch it. Another element of this program is to identify markets in the county that are underutilizing local food. For example, our correction system. The correction system buys a lot of food. And right now, I know in Santa Fe County, and it's probably true in other counties in the state as well, all that food is really coming from out of state. And so we want to actually figure out ways for them to buy local. Also, senior centers. They produce a lot of meals and so on, congregate meals and meals on wheels. And so, again, we want to encourage more purchase of local products. Another element of the plan is that we're going to launch a robust buy local campaign so that people realize that there is local produce and meat available, and they should try whenever possible to buy that. Finally, one thing that we're going to do that I think is really important is we're going to be starting to establish baseline data, and that is document how much food is being produced locally and how much of that is making its way back into the community, so that as time goes forward and we implement different projects and so on, we can tell, how much of an effect they're having over time. So that's pretty much my presentation, and I think we can go on to the next part of the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Holian. We really appreciate you taking time to be on the webinar. At this point in time, we'd like to have a discussion with the three of you, with Ed, Holly, and Kathleen, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura Gutierrez to facilitate.
Thanks, Karen. So I'll just ask, I think we'll probably have time for just a few questions, and I know that some additional questions have come in about the survey that we can address at the end here. I guess, Kathleen, maybe we'll start with you first. Some of the great solutions that I heard you describe in the plan, I was wondering if you had to, in developing those ideas, if you had to deal with any situations where you had to really mediate competing interests, and how difficult or not that might have been?
Yes, that is always true. I mean, there are issues that can become, very political and divisive. And like, for example, in our area, there's a lot of talk about GMOs. And there are people who, would like to just ban GMOs entirely in Santa Fe County. But then there's an awful lot of GMO alfalfa being grown already. And so it's really, it just takes a lot of time and a lot of dialogue and bringing all the different entities together to have conversations so that people can understand each other and what the various issues that they face are, what the various problems that they face are. And it just seems to me that the more conversation you have, the more you bring people together, they understand, the challenges that other people are facing. And usually when you have people from a whole lot of different entities come together, they come up with the solution that is not what any one of them thought was the solution in the beginning, but tends to be the best solution because, it's bringing a lot of different ideas together. So it's just communication.
Great, thank you. And just building on that a little bit, would you say, and I would also open this up to all three of you, would you say that the local government being involved in the discussion has been a positive aspect in terms of engaging the community? I think in some communities that maybe can be seen as a negative, but in some cases I've certainly seen where the local government's really been great at getting people to the table.
Yeah, I think it has been really great. For one thing, like here, a lot of the commissioners actually farm themselves, and so they really understand this issue, and they're part of the community, and people, realize that they know what they're talking about. And so the county government can be a forum for bringing people together. Like when we did this ag implementation plan, we organized numerous meetings out in the community about this topic, and they were very well attended.
Excellent. Holly, would you have anything to add on that about the role of local government in getting people to the table?
Yeah, I would say that one of our goals with getting more residents involved is to really integrate food into existing positions. So we have community planners in the Department of Planning, and so they were already going to many community meetings. And so really making sure that the planners themselves are versed on food system issues, and then can be a liaison to the residents. And so one of the goals that we're seeing in many of the agencies is making sure that all the staff are trained on the issues and can be able to communicate with the residents on different food issues and then refer them back to us to have further conversations when it's needed.
Great. I really liked that chart you started with. You mentioned it was based on the mayor's org chart, kind of drawing those connections between the food system and all those different pieces of city government. Was there anywhere when you first started out in your role where you were sort of surprised to discover the food connection?
No, where I was surprised is I feel like I do more and more of my work on realizing and helping agencies realize that their decisions impact food even though it's not a food subject. So when transportation is thinking about a policy, they may not be asking, oh, how does that impact grocery stores? And so I think the biggest issue we have is paying attention to when food is not obvious and make sure that that is when it's getting discussed. Like in times of emergency in the Emergency Operations Center, making sure that food is right there present in our how we address emergencies as safety and crime and other components. And so it's really looking at when to make sure food comes to the table and when and prevent it from being overlooked.
Have there been any areas where you've been particularly surprised at how kind of quickly they've gotten it? Some of those more unexpected examples that you just mentioned?
Yeah, you know where we saw an amazing success was last year during snow. We had a huge snowstorm, Snow Jonas, and it was a huge amount of snow in a very short period of time. And in the Emergency Operations Center, one of the very first things that came out was how we're going to make sure the kids are fed because schools are going to be closed for a while. Whereas in the past, we were not always thinking about kids getting fed in times of emergencies or seniors getting fed. It was being addressed, but it wasn't necessarily one of the first things coming out of the EOC. And now we're really looking at quick responses and quick thinking around food supply in times of emergency as well.
Excellent. So Ed, are you still with us too?
I am.
Excellent. So turning from Holly's position in a strong mayor city to your position, and as you mentioned, a council manager form of government, I wondered about just where you sit in your role as the chief administrative officer. If you could say a little bit more about how you personally kind of got bought into this whole idea of food security and the other priorities you described, and just building on that, how you might coach somebody who's interested in approaching their city manager or county manager in their own community. How do they kind of frame that conversation?
Well, I think in our situation, given the concentration of poverty that we have in our downtown area and a whole set of other issues that go with that, substandard housing and all those kinds of things, that's really been the dominant issue since I've been here, trying to address those issues. So clearly there was something that's right on the top of my agenda from day one. We're also blessed here because we have a lot of groups and organizations that really took the leadership, unlike maybe Baltimore or some larger cities where you can have particular staff assigned to a problem. We don't have that luxury. So we very much, I think, in our situation, had the non-governmental organizations take the lead, and our job then became to provide encouragement, to provide support when we could, either in kind or with some small funding, primarily through federal sources, and work with those folks. In terms of approaching your local government, my suggestion always is, if you've got an issue you're really into and you really want to have an impact, look for somebody on the council or in the government who shares that interest. In our case, for example, St. Mary's Nutrition Center is a very big actor. I have a council member who retired from St. Mary's Hospital working in a health clinic right in the downtown neighborhood. So it was an obvious choice to get him involved and him supportive. And we have our Community Economic Development Department. We have a person up there who spends a great deal of time in the downtown working on these issues, was another one. So if you can find someone, an elected official, and also a staff member who shares an interest or is supportive of the issue, that's where you can start building support. I'll also note that you don't always need, probably shouldn't say this, you don't always need council and elected official support. There's a lot of stuff that can be done at staff level through simply participating in these groups, showing that you're supportive of them, and doing what you can to help them out. Really helps to have the political leaders on board. In our case, we do, but you can do a lot administratively as well.
Thanks. And I'm glad you mentioned funding. We did get a question about that, which I'll turn to in just a moment. But given that you acknowledged the important role, I mean, everybody did, but just right now, you acknowledge the important role your NGO partners play. Can you give us an example of any situation where you really kind of had to draw the boundary of your role and say, this is as much as we can do, and you guys really need to, carry the bulk of the weight?
Well, that often comes back to resource constrictions. And I will be honest, I think our NGO partners recognize how restricted we are. There's a whole bunch of issues in Maine about local government finance. So they really haven't been very demanding of us. And they've recognized that, sometimes through the CDBG program, they may ask for $20,000 and get $8,000. And they've been willing to accept that and work with it, and really have been very aggressive in getting other sources of support. We have some foundations involved, we have private giving, all kinds of things to help support the effort. So we haven't really had a situation where we've had to say, no, we can't do that. I mean, there have been a few minor issues that come up about who's paying for the water bill at community gardens and things like that, and we just take care of that in-house. So we haven't really had that problem.
Okay, great. So I mentioned we received a question about how you're all funding your work in your various communities. You basically just answered that, I think, unless there's anything you wanted to add, Ed. Otherwise, I would let Kathleen and Holly chime in too. You're all working at different scales.
Well, the one thing I'll mention is we do have, some of our staff resources are devoted to this, and that we have people who spend a lot of time in that community, not just in community economic development, but planning, code enforcement, our police department. We have a substation in the neighborhood, and certainly our fire department because of the concerns that exist around some of our housing. So we have a huge level of involvement there, largely in kind or staff, already funded staff positions. In terms of additional resources, we're pretty limited to, looking to federal funds through our community development block grant program, or looking to our Council of Governments that sometimes can come up with funding through other federal sources that can be used for these kinds of programs.
Thanks. Kathleen, did you want to add anything about funding?
Well, when we set policies through our resolutions, that frees up our staff to work on, those initiatives and so on. So a lot of the funding for that is coming out of our general fund. But like with regard to this TDR program that I was mentioning, in essence, the county is going to seed the TDR bank with some funding, but then it is a market-driven a program, and so funding will come back in to the TDR bank from developers and so on, private developers, and the county will be able to reimburse itself. The other thing that we do put a fair amount of funding into is capital projects. Like, for example, the county contributed a lot of money through a GO bond issuance to build the farmers market facility that we have in Santa Fe, in the city of Santa Fe. So we do capital projects, and the money for that generally comes from GO bonds that are passed during the elections.
Okay. And Holly?
In Baltimore, we have a really unique funding structure. 6.5 years ago, we started with some funding from multiple foundations pooling their money, and the money was then housed with the fiscal agent, Baltimore Community Foundation, created a sustainability food fund. So initially, my position was funded through the Baltimore Community Foundation, even though I looked and acted like a city employee with the city office. My money was flowing through the Sustainability Food Fund. And over time, once I became a city employee, I then was able to get more grant funding through the Sustainability Food Fund for additional staff. And then once I had additional staff on board, I was able to leverage that money from the grants to be able to incorporate them into the city's outcome budgeting process. So we went from all grant-funded part-time positions at first to now we have 5 full-time positions in 4 different agencies in Baltimore.
And actually, this is Kathleen Holian. I would like to also add that we get funding from our state legislature for some of the initiatives that we have. Like, for example, the legislature has allocated a significant amount of funding for public schools to purchase locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables for the school meal programs.
All right. So I have one more, it looks like one more question each for Kathleen and for Holly. We have just about 4 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have a couple minutes to address some other questions about the survey and follow-up materials. So maybe I'll give each of you about a minute for these if possible. I'll start with Kathleen. Of course, it's a loaded question, but how do you make sure attention is paid to issues facing both urban and rural communities, not just one or the other? How do you bridge the gaps between?
Oh, well, I have a great answer to that because some years ago, Santa Fe City and Santa Fe County created the Santa Fe City County Food Policy Council. And so it brings together the city and the county as far as discussing, what's important. And then, they look at our situation and they make recommendations to the county commission and the city council as to, how we can, for example, increase food security in our area and so on.
All right, thank you. And for Holly, the final question was, were your city councilors open and supportive to being briefed on their district food environment?
This was actually what was so amazing from the very beginning. It's never, everyone has always agreed and supported the issue of food access. And it's been very well received. When we release these reports, no one's saying you're wrong. It's more of timing, strategies, what can we do and when. And so what was interesting when we briefed the council members, and we briefed 12 of the 14. One was out of town and one was out on leave due to illness. So everyone who was available was briefed. And as a result of those briefings, when we introduced the personal property tax credit for food desert incentive areas, it was unanimously supported. And it was amazingly quick at that. So it was introduced as an administrative bill in October. It was signed by December and implemented by January, and we've already had one store use the credit. So I think that the council district maps were very well received and the briefings were well received as well.
Thank you. So just trying to summarize a few questions we received about follow-up resources. We had one about the ICMA MSU case studies and one about the article that Holly mentioned about the employee CSA. I think we will indeed provide links to all of those materials in the follow-up message that you all will receive. We also received some questions about kind of drilling down into our survey data at the state and local level. I'll let Jelani add to this, but I think currently our feeling is that yes, we can aggregate, we can present results of the survey aggregated at the state level. It's probably at this point on a sort of per request basis. We have looked at some states where I'm in Michigan more closely than others thus far. Jelani, would you concur that we're sort of available per request until further notice?
Yes, that's right, Laura. Yes, we have the data, and we do have the states tagged, so we can compile the data by state. and we can provide that on a kind of by request basis. The level of statistical significance varies from state to state. We have some states like Hawaii where we receive very few, and then other states where we receive hundreds of responses. So on a case by case, we get you that information.
I've already seen a couple of emails pop up from folks while we've been on the webinar, so we'll look forward to following up with those individual requests. But with that, I would turn it over to Karen and Ann for wrapping this up.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you, Jelani, Kathleen, Ed, Holly, and Laura again for all of you being on the webinar this afternoon and being willing to participate and share your insights about what's happening in your local communities, and also to share the results of the survey. It was fascinating to see what's happening across the nation with local governments and their support for local food systems or not. So with that, we'll conclude the webinar, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Have a great afternoon.
And thank you.